If you abdicate your civic responsibility, then power-mad tyrants will vacuum it up and use it against you. Because someone's going to take that responsibility. And if it's not you, then it's going to be someone who wants to take that from you. You know, I have some investment in Bitcoin because I'm curious about it. It's a genius idea, but that doesn't mean that it's destined for success. But, you know, revolutionary changes usually bring about radically unintended consequences. So, and I think that's why the marketplace is still toying with Bitcoin, you know, instead of rushing headlong into its embrace, let's say. Well, I like the idea of decentralized, I wouldn't say power, because again, I think that's the wrong way of construing the situation, because as soon as you think about decentralized power, then you've fallen into the clutches of those who think that power is the fundamental motivation. I really do think it's an unbelievably pathological presupposition, because what it presupposes is that, well, if everyone had their own choice, what they would choose is to compel others to do their will. And I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that we can find the meaning that sustains us in life by forcing others to grant our short-term wishes. I think that's an extraordinarily counterproductive way to live. It isn't the distribution of power that's the advantage to decentralization. It's the distribution of destiny and responsibility. You see this in the modern world constantly, especially among people who are married, but within families as well. People are very bad at negotiating mediation. They have no idea how to do it. Why that is very complicated, but I think it's partly the desert and tyranny problem. It's hard to communicate with your partner, because if it turns out that you're wrong, which you often are, probably usually, and it means you have to give up something you believe to be true, and which wasn't, which is a bit of the tyrannical you, and then when you give that up, then you have to be in the desert for a while, and that's annoying. And so it's much easier just to tell everyone laughs because you all know that's absolutely true. You're depriving your people of the responsibility of their own destiny. You're depriving them of the adventure of their life. You're depriving them of the necessity of their adventure. And you're setting yourself up as another pharaoh. Because you can imagine the pharaonic situation, the tyrannical situation. It's like the Tower of Babel. There's a lot of disenchanted, fractionated individuals, and there's a tyrant. And that's all the structure there is. And that's just not any good. And all these disaffected individuals have no responsibility, and so all the responsibility is taken up by the tyrannical force, and then you have a huge gap between the tyrant and the disaffected individuals, and it's just a recipe for tyranny and slavery. It's a recipe for disaster. And so what Jethro says to Moses is, he says something like, you have to build an intermediary hierarchy, although those aren't the words that are used. And it turns out that we build those intermediary hierarchies in our own neural networks in an attempt to process the world properly. Otherwise, leave the people to their own devices, because they need the responsibility. And if you take on all that abdicated responsibility and destiny, then you'll just be another pharaoh. And that's the principle of subsidiarity. That's the technical term. And the principle of subsidiarity is that decisions are best made at the lowest and most local level possible. And that looks like a universal principle. And Jonathan Pajot, who some of you know about, told me, yes, he's very smart, Jonathan Pajot. He told me in the Exodus seminar that was the archetypal pattern for the idea of Mount Sinai. It's the archetypal pattern for the notion of proper governance. A distributed system of responsibility as opposed to absolute slavery. And it's opposed to absolute slavery, it's opposed to absolute tyranny, and it's also opposed to freedom without bounds. That's a whole different idea, because what it does is juxtapose against slavery ordered freedom, not borderless and boundless freedom. Because borderless and boundless freedom is just chaos, whereas ordered freedom is freedom according to a set of appropriate principles. And then the question is, well, what are the principles? And that's the same question as what is the story that should guide you? In any case, the proper model of governance is something like a hierarchy of responsibility. And so one of the things that Tammy and I have been endeavoring to do as we travel from city to city, and I suppose what I'm doing right now, is to remind all of you of one thing, I suppose. If you abdicate your civic responsibility, then power-mad tyrants will vacuum it up and use it against you. Because someone's going to take that responsibility. And if it's not you, then it's going to be someone who wants to take that from you. Now, I've been thinking this through with regard to such things as church attendance, because I've heard all the arguments about why you shouldn't attend church, and it's not like I've been a great attender of churches myself, by the way. And I've come to the conclusion that that attitude, regardless of its rationale, is wrong. Because it may be the case that the churches are corrupt and misguided. But that's also the case for you, by the way. And if they are corrupt and misguided, then they could probably use some help. And if you're not corrupt and misguided, then you could help. And if you are corrupt and misguided, well, maybe the church could help you. And then you have a reciprocal relationship, And part of the reason that Bitcoin is attractive to people is because we all have the sense right now, and that's certainly part of the reason why so many of you are here tonight, is that there's a little bit too much tyranny going on. And that's the collusion of large-scale enterprises at the top. And so there are attempts to push back on that by developing decentralized systems. And the idea that we could develop a decentralized standard of universal value, which is what money is very interesting idea. And it makes sense. But that doesn't mean it's right. I went to a Bitcoin conference a while back, and it was full of Bitcoin enthusiasts, and of course all they wanted to hear was enthusiastic things about Bitcoin, and fair enough, because it's not like I'm a great fan of the fiat currency that allows governments to print money and inflate away value, because that punishes people who are sensible and who make the proper sacrifices. It's inflationary, as you're all seeing right now. It's a very bad idea. Now, that doesn't mean that Bitcoin is the right solution. And part of the problem with introducing a radical solution like Bitcoin, and it's radical because it would change the way we undertake all our trade, is that it probably won't do just the things you think it will do, right? Because when you change a system that is so complex you don't understand it, like when you disrupt the supply chain to hypothetically control COVID, all sorts of things happen that you don't expect, which is what conservatives always remind liberals. It's like, don't be thinking that your revolutionary change is only going to bring about the positive things that you envision, because you don't know what you're mucking about with. What's happening is allow a variety of currencies to battle with one another on the competitive landscape, and we sort of have that internationally because every currency has to trade against every other currency. And now we've added cryptocurrency to that mix, and that seems to me to be a good experimental option. And maybe Bitcoin will aggregate to itself the value that its adherents claim, but that remains to be seen, and it doesn't mean it's a pathway without pitfalls, right? Because we imagine Bitcoin was successful, and all of a sudden we never had any control over, we really never were able to exercise control over our monetary system again. Because that's what it would mean. Because it really is decentralized. And if Bitcoin and the blockchain technology truly obtained the upper hand, we would have put our economic system outside of the political domain. Now, you can make a case that maybe that would be an okay thing, right? Because you don't want the standard of value subordinate to political machination. But it also means that it's no longer subordinate to the collective will, the collective express will of the people as manifested in the electoral process. And we don't know if that would be a good thing. I have some investment in Bitcoin because I'm curious about it. It's a genius idea, but that doesn't mean that it's destined for success. So I'm pro decentralization. I like the idea that mendacious, short-term oriented, narcissistic, power-mad politicians can't inflate the currency and steal value from people to fund their idiot pet projects. But revolutionary changes usually bring about radically unintended consequences. So, and I think that's why the marketplace is still toying with Bitcoin, instead of rushing headlong into its embrace, let's say. So that's what I think about Bitcoin.